So I'm very pleased to say that we're joined today by a man who may not know it, but has a significant role in a way, in the way in which guerrilla cricket itself started. When I interviewed Guerrilla Hendo, I asked him how he got involved, and his first involvement was with Test Match Sofa. And listening to it, the first voice he heard, which is true for many of us, was that of some Scouser. And he said to me, I just really liked the fact that somebody was broadcasting someone with a Scouser accent, because that just doesn't happen. And I thought, I just want to be part of a crew that does that. And of course, that Scouser was no one other than Gary Naylor, who continues on in the guerrilla cricket incarnation. Welcome, Gary.
Well, I didn't know you were going to tell that story. It's not one I've heard before, and really rather touched and moved. So, yes, I'll need a moment just to catch my breath. That was lovely to hear, Jez.
So Gary, we're just trying to give our patrons a little background on some of the guerrillas they hear on air, because most of the time, well, we talk mostly about cricket. We do talk about cheese and other irrelevances as well from time to time, but not a lot about ourselves. So I'd just like to ask you to cast your mind back to your youth so many years ago, and let us know how the young Gary Naylor came into connection with sport, and in particular with cricket.
Well, many listeners will have heard some of this before, because I come from the Hunter S. Thompson School of Gonzo journalism, where no matter what I'm reporting on, what I'm actually reporting on is me. So forgive me if I've said some of these things before. I chose to wear the Everton hat today, not least because it's time for all good Evertonians to come to the aid of the party, with Everton being in the form they're in at the moment. But it also reminds me that the first live sport I saw was I was taken by my father in, I think, May 1970. I would be 6 years old, just about to turn 7. And I was in the main stand when Everton secured the 1970 First Division title, that match. And I tell that story not because I can remember much about it.
It might be worth pointing out to people that the First Division in 1970 was effectively the Premier League of today, because some don't even know that.
That's absolutely true, Jez. Looking at your grey beard and my grey beard, I was rather thinking that everyone would be suitably or so furnished. But yes, it's the equivalent of the Premier League, and I've kind of vague recollections of bright lights and noise and that kind of thing, but not much more than that. But that was an example of what my father did. I was very fortunate. He was a very big fan of all sport. He was a football fan, obviously, Evertonian, who'd been going really since just after the war. He used to go to Liverpool as well, as many did back then. But he also loved his cricket. He would go to Bootle, where I later played for Hightown Seconds, and he was more proud, I think, of me playing for Hightown Seconds at Bootle than he was of any sort of degree awarding ceremonies or anything like that, because that's where he watched cricket as a kid in club cricket and Liverpool competition. But you know, we were taken. We weren't marched along there by any means, but as a kid, you do what your dad says. So we went along there. I remember he fashioned a little wooden stool I would use to stand on when I was a teenager on the wall in the paddock at Goodison. And I don't want to talk too much about football, but some listeners may know a very famous goal Andy King scored in 1977 to win a derby against Liverpool for the first time in, I think, 7 years. And I was almost exactly aligned with Andy King when he volleyed that ball into the net. I would have been a good call for a VAR decision, because I was exactly on the touchline aligned there. And I was standing on that wooden box at the time. So it's really in the blood, and it's in the blood of my two brothers as well, both of whom are big football fans, both season ticket holders at Everton, both go to cricket, both test match cricket, one-day internationals and county cricket, and occasionally club cricket as well. My younger brother was a rugby player. He played for Waterloo Colts and still goes to rugby union. But I will occasionally go down to the Stoop at Harlequins to see rugby. But obviously, my two sports that I follow with almost obsessive zeal are football and cricket.
So, did you play much cricket yourself?
Well, I did. I played. I went to a state comprehensive school, and it was in the last days when they still had their playing field. So I was kind of introduced to the game at secondary school when I was 11 years old. But I then played for Hightown in the Liverpool competition. I wasn't good enough to play first team, which is quite a decent standard first team. But I played second team when I was about 16, I think maybe 15. But I've been playing for their third team, I think at the age of 14. And I also played for a Sunday side called Litherland Methodists, who were about as far away from Methodists as you could get. But I enjoyed all that. And it was a real education. It was an education in more ways than one. It was an education in how to play cricket, because we played on some very, very well-prepared and well-tended wickets, which meant as a bowler, your margin for error was limited. I was a bowler. So, if I was short, I was hammered square on the offside or leg side. And if I was full, I was driven through the covers. So that showed me a little about the discipline of bowling. And it was also an education, and I didn't know it at the time. You never do when you're a teenager, but it was an education in a very different world to the one that I was used to. I went to school. My parents were, my father was a panel beater, fixing broken cars after crashes. My mother worked on the school dinners in the afternoon and in the cinema in the evening. But I found myself in conversation, and in conversations probably a little too grand, overhearing or eavesdropping or hearing conversations between doctors and lawyers and accountants. And this was a world that was foreign to me. But it gave me an understanding. It gave me a brief window at quite a young age into what were quite different worlds, which I subsequently became more familiar with as post-compulsory education introduced me to friends who were not from the same kind of parts of Liverpool that I came from, and weren't mixing in that same company. That's not to say there's any hierarchy. I've never believed in any hierarchy of culture, nor people, nor education, or anything. It was just a kind of different world. And I remember one time I was waiting for my lift to go and play for Hightown, and I was at the top of the road at the bus stop with the next door neighbour, and he said to me, "Are you getting the bus?" And I said, no, I'm just waiting for a lift. It's easier to pull in here. And my lift turned up, and he was a Liverpool-based diamond dealer, not dodgy, but a Liverpool-based diamond dealer. If you can imagine it, a silver XJS Jaguar car. Now, that was about the height of sophistication. It was like Simon Templar pulling up or something to get into the car. So nonchalantly, at the age of 15 or something, said, "Oh, here he is now. I'll just get in there. I'll see you maybe tomorrow then." And off I went, leaving him at the bus stop and me in an XJS. So it was an extraordinary, and cricket has always played an extraordinary part in my life, not just in a sporting sense, but in a social sense, in an educational sense, in a psychological sense. And I remain eternally grateful for what the game has given to me and continues to give to me to this day.
It's an interesting question, actually. I find myself wondering whether being picked up in a SGS Jaguar in Liverpool could have been transferred into being picked up that way if you lived somewhere in the northern London suburbs, and I find myself thinking that's unlikely.
I think it's unlikely in Tooting maybe, but perhaps not in Battersea these days, and certainly not in kind of Golders Green, Hendon, Finchley, the first part of London I lived in when I came down in 1981. So yes, it was. They were rarer sights. They were rarer sights back then.
So what were you any good at?
Well, I was a bowler. I opened the bowling, and I bowled outswing, and I could almost always get the ball to swing all the time I was bowling, and I had good discipline. I didn't try to bowl too fast. I was sharp enough to open the bowling, as I say, at a fairly
Mm.
decent standard. But my main obligation was always to bowl line and length. And I played in my teenage years, and then I stopped because I moved to London, and there was girls to chase and
Yep.
pints to drink and all of this, as many
Yeah.
do. But I came back at 27, was I? No, 28, and played for Putney, and I had an enormous time playing league cricket, but it was much more social. It wasn't of the same high standard in terms of playing 11s, nor in terms of the most of the grounds that we played at. But just to show that a little bit like riding the bike, you kind of never lose it. My first season's figures, because I played until August, I think, because I went off in August to a friend's farmhouse in the Dordogne and drank red wine and stuff like that. So my cricket seasons were always a little truncated. But my first year, I bowled 141 overs, 41 of which were maidens. So I didn't always take wickets, but that's why I have that expression. I used to take my wickets at the other end, because I gave them nothing. I gave them nothing to hit. And in the 90s, if you gave them nothing to hit, they didn't hit. So they had to have a pop at the other end, and that's when the ball went in the air. And that's when I would take catches. Now, there's an oft misquote that you're very keen on, Jez.
Well, you go for it, mate. You tell us the truth.
Well, the truth is, as you can see, I'm wearing glasses. Most people of 58 years old do need glasses. If they don't need glasses, they're fooling themselves, because the eye is a muscle, and the muscle wears out over time, like most things. So you do need glasses. But I didn't know in 1990 that I needed glasses. Indeed, I didn't wear any until I was in my mid-30s, because I didn't need glasses. Neither my parents wore glasses until the mid-30s. Neither my brothers wear glasses. We've been fortunate to have somewhere in the genes something which says that the eyes are okay. But what I did find out is that, unlike 19 years of age, by 27 years of age, the ball was coming at me and it was hitting my hands. And I was thinking, what's going on here? Why is this, what used to be easy, now difficult? And it was because I wasn't sighting the ball early enough. And that was the first sign that my eyes had gone from kind of 20/20 plus vision down to something less than that. And when I did drop a few catches, still didn't drop many, because if you've got big hands, and I do have big hands, then that helps. But in my teen years, I was confident, and my eyes were really, really good, and my hands were big. And I don't recall dropping catches at all. I remember taking a few screamers, but I don't recall dropping any catches in my teen years. I do recall dropping catches, but again, not that many at 27, 28, 29. Yeah. Now, one of the reasons for this is that as a batsman, I was pretty useless. So if you want to contribute to a side, we all talk about sort of three-dimensional players and everything. I realized that I've never had much of an arm, so I couldn't really throw the ball particularly well on the boundary. But put me at first slip, put me at gully, put me short extra, short mid-wicket, and I'll stop the ball and I'll catch the ball. And so that was my contribution as a cricketer, was to open the bowling and to catch pigeons as they flew past me.
Well, there was another word you used in there, apart from the eyesight, that I think is very important, and that was confidence. Yeah. I think, speaking from personal experience, by the time I came back to playing cricket in my mid-30s, I suppose, I really didn't have the confidence. I was pleased to be allowed to play. And I thought I was going to drop catches, so I did. But the other side of it, I suppose, is that you spoke about when you came back to playing cricket in London, eventually, that there was a much more social side of the game. So my suspicion is that the degree of competitiveness wasn't as high in terms of the shame attached to dropping a catch as well.
Well, there's a little bit of that, and I confess that I've never had that as an issue, and I didn't understand it when I first played cricket, that these urbane, educated, all-rounded, sophisticated men who I felt were sort of ancient and who were probably sort of in their early 30s when I was 14, 15, and when I started playing with them, that they would be so down after a defeat. Because I had literally forgotten the result of the match by the time I stepped over the boundary rope on the way to the bar after playing. And my attitude to playing cricket was always the same, which was I enjoy the victories, but I'm not bothered if we lose. It's just the other side got the win. So I played to win. I didn't entirely enjoy Sunday cricket where it wouldn't always be taken seriously. And I never wanted to get a wicket where somebody makes 30 and then hits one in the air so they can allow another batsman to come in. I'd much rather that they got out trying to make 50 off 20 balls or something like that, rather than the deliberate hit in the air and then get out. So I like to play cricket to win, but I've never been one to be down after a defeat. There was one time I remember where I did feel that, and I can't remember who it is we were playing against. It was playing for Putney, and I think we were in the second division or the third division, I can't remember, of the league we were in. And the team we were playing against needed the win to go up. And I opened the bowling, and their captain Edgewon hit it hard to the wicketkeeper who caught it. And at that level, we had, it was the umpires were players from the opposition team who were the 10 and 11 batsmen or something, and said not out. And I looked at the batsman and said, "Come on, you hit that, didn't you?" And he just looked down. And we're playing on a Saturday. So I said, "Well, okay, all right, if that's what it's going to be, fair enough." And I got annoyed. With that. And I don't think professional players should walk. I think it's the umpire's job to do the job. They're professional umpires. But on a Saturday, when you're playing in a league where it doesn't really matter which division you're in the next season, and you've got your number 10 and 11 who are umpiring at the other end, if you hit it that hard to the keeper, you've got to help. You've got to help the umpire out a little bit. And that's literally the only match amongst hundreds that I've played where I felt any sense of rancor at the end of it.
It's interesting. Talking to a number of gorillas now, I think you and Bear come across as probably the most competitive in terms of the cricket, because there's an awful lot of the attraction of cricket as a social medium to a certain extent. That yes, playing the game is important, but just as important is the connection with people and just being part of that community around the cricket club. Did you find a lot of that or not?
Yeah, I did, particularly when I was a bit older. I mean, one of the advantages was I played at Putney, so we'd finished a match, I don't know, 7:30. I'd down 3 or 4 pints in no time, electrolyte replacement, of course. And then at sort of 9 o'clock, I'd have the whole of Putney to play with in the 90s. Now, Putney at that time, it's a bit cheat these days, but at that time it was a fantastic mix of people who were young, had money, and were out on the town. So I went to that many restaurants, pubs down by the river, all this kind of thing. So I had both the cricket club itself and my mates at the cricket club, and then sort of the evenings out on a Saturday night afterwards. But I really, really enjoyed any number of conversations on the boundary, walking around the boundary, playing silly games. I remember on the boundary once at Putney, we were talking about a question of sport or something, and instead of the what's happened next round, we went for what's just happened round. And in those days, goal celebrations in football or cricket celebrations for wickets weren't quite as replayed as they are these days, and aren't almost sort of branded or copyrighted the way Ronaldo's is or something. But we went through a few of those, and that passed a very happy hour while we were progressing from 30 for 3 to 60 for 5 or something. So I've always enjoyed that. And of course, you're out in the sunshine. It's just it was just delightful. I don't regret a single second of the many hours I played cricket as a teenager, and then into my late 20s, early 30s. I gave up because I had a child, so parenting obligations supervened, and I think this is a real problem. There's lots of talk about the problems of participation in cricket in the UK, but I think the different expectations, and I'm not denying they are correct, that parenting is a much more shared occupation than it was perhaps in our parents' day. That means that you can't just say, I've done Monday to Friday at work, I'll be out at midday, I'll see you at midnight tonight. leaving the mother with the child to look after all day on a Saturday.
Yep.
Especially, you can't say it when I'm going to the Oval on Sunday. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have been in that situation, even to the extent of watching cricket. I recall going to WACA with 3 children in tow quite frequently, and that was the only basis upon which I used to get to watch cricket. As long as I relieved...
you were just cutting out a little bit there, Jez, so I'm not sure of that.
Okay, well, I've got you back now. Are you back? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, good. I can hear you right now.
Well,
can I just say something about that, because this is an important part of my life as well in cricket. Is I made, through the Guardian's over-by-over coverage, and then subsequently at the Oval, I've made some very good friends, and we would meet regularly on the shelf at the Oval for all kinds of Surrey matches. And both my boys were members at the Oval from quite a young age, and they enjoyed it very much. But there's another element to that, which is I think Lena started going when he was maybe 5 years old. Jesper would be 8, and they went for 5 or 6 years. And I felt completely comfortable, absolutely 100% comfortable, when they would make their own way to go to the toilet, or I would ask them to go to the bar and get themselves a glass of Coca-Cola or something like that, because the safety environment, the decency of the people who would look after them or keep an eye on them if I had to go somewhere or doing something, and the friendliness that they saw displayed, I think that was a really important part of their upbringing. Obviously, it's very different at football, which is much more tribal and much more aggressive. But I can certainly say that if you do have small children and you're thinking of taking them to the cricket, there are few better places to go with small children than the cricket. And I remain grateful to this day for the decency shown to my 2 kids growing up by my friends at the Oval.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I know it's referred to the nursery as the nursery for other reasons, but certainly at Lord's, quite frequently you see pictures of kids playing out on the nursery while the game is on, don't you? And
you do, and round the back of the pavilion as well. There is space there isn't at the Oval. But this was a big thing about 2020 when it started, that there were all kinds of areas that were kind of fenced off so kids could have a little bit of a hit, you know, like you have that Nestle program, is it called Milka or something in Australia, with the plastic bats and that kind of stuff. Milo, and we had that, and somehow that got forgotten, and then they bring along the 100s in order to do what they were already doing with the 20, but T20, but I've forgotten about it. But that's discussion
let's go
for
down
another
that
day.
Absolutely. So what I wanted to ask you next was how you came to get involved with originally Test Match Sofa set up.
Yeah, well, I think it's almost so distant in time now. I think I read Barney Ronay's profile of Dan Norcross and the team at the Guardian, and I was at home. I think it must have been Easter vacation or something. I'm not sure what it was. Maybe it was a summer, and I clicked on the link. And I heard Dan Norcross, Jarrett Kimber, and I thought, well, this is fun. This is the kind of thing that I was looking for, because I was not, unlike many gorillas, there are gorillas who don't like the BBC's Test Match Special. There are gorillas that do like it. Almost everybody at Test Match Sofa did like Test Match Special, because that's where they got their love for broadcasting from. I was never a great fan of Test Match Special. It always felt, and it still does feel, a little bit like the kind of upper sixth remove Dawn to me. It comes from a place that I was unfamiliar with. I didn't hate it, or I didn't despise it, but it wasn't the sport, and it wasn't the set of attitudes that I enjoyed. Where Test Match Sofa was, despite the fact that many people on Test Match Sofa may have been in the upper six remove as well, but they were different kinds. They were different kinds. And then I discovered that it was in Tooting. So I discovered it was just up the road from me, which is where, that was where the room where it happened. So I thought, well, I want to get in touch with these people. By that point, I'd been writing about cricket for a few years at initially the Googly and then at 99.94. So I went to see Dan and Sophia, I think it was, in Tooting Bec in a pub, and they talked to me. They talked to me a little bit about it. And the next thing I know, I turned up at 5 a.m. At Dan's place in Tooting Bec for the England-Bangladesh series of 2009. And I think Dan was commentating. The Bear would have been there and about, and Jared was there. A few other people would drift in and out, and they said, just watch a session. And so I watched it. Then said, have a go on the kind of summarizing. So I had to go on the summarizing, and then they said, do a bit of ball by ball. So I did a bit of ball by ball, and they haven't been able to shut me up since.
Well, I mean, nobody's been able to shut you up anywhere since, have they, Gary? But I mean, that's part of your brand. Sorry,
it is. It is. No, it is. Believe it or not, you're not the first one to have said so.
Oh, I find that hard. I asked Hendo what his favorite moment on air was, and he confessed that he had so much fun in the first year at Test Match Sofa. It was hard to remember, but he said he thinks the best moment was when he was sitting between Mark Steele and Miles Jupp, is it?
Yeah.
And there was a rain delay, and they were talking about, I think, a pencil museum or something like that. And he said, all of a sudden, I realized I can do this because this isn't about cricket. This is about people. This is about communication. And it's, cricket's obviously an important part of it, and it's the link through everything. But it's actually about bringing people into that place. So, I mean, I'd be interested to know your philosophy in relation to guerrilla cricket in particular now, and how you see that differing, if you like, from the mainstream broadcasters.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I've always looked at Test Match Sofa first and guerrilla cricket as it subsequently largely became. I say largely because there was continuity between the two broadcasters. I mean, I see cricket as at the heart of what we're doing. So you never lose the cricket. Nobody should tune in and think what's happening in the cricket. That should be front and center. And I often remind myself, because when I listen to guerrilla cricket, I want to know the score. So I often remind myself to say the score. And that can be quite tricky when you're doing ball by ball, because you're aware that you've had lots of conversation during an over, and you're aware at the end of the over, you want to bring in the tweets and the other comments coming through on YouTube and elsewhere. So sometimes in your anxiety, you throw to the tweet chair without giving the score. And as long as one has in mind that you have to give the score, that will always bring you back to the cricket. Always bring you back to the idea that what we're doing is using the privilege that we have in seeing the game and having access to the stats and so on that are on screen, sometimes on our computers, and bringing that to people who aren't as fortunate as us, who maybe are not watching. Many of our viewers are watching the visuals, but many are not. And being able to give them a sense, not just of the match in progress, but a sense of the atmosphere and the pleasure that we're deriving from it. I then see the next job that we have at Guerrilla Cricket is to convey the camaraderie and the joy that we have in the game and in each other's company. And that comes obviously through talking about the cricket, but it also comes through talking about the other interests that we have, our personalities. We give ourselves a little bit. We do go for more of the gonzo style of journalism, but I've never had a problem with that. For many years I was a lecturer, and one thing I knew, when you're standing in front of an audience of 200 students and you've got 2 hours and you're talking about something that perhaps many of them are either not interested in or are going to have trouble grasping, that they have to buy you first before they buy the material. So I've always tried to be mindful of that, to think that I have to do engaging as well as the cricket has to be engaging. So I want to go across to the listener and say, come and join us with this life that we lead in these strange, even stranger now. It used to be pretty strange in Sydenham and in other places where we broadcast from, but it's even stranger now. We broadcast from this strange ethereal world in the ether of Zoom. But we bring them to that world, and not everyone will enjoy it. Guerrilla cricket isn't for everyone. It's not supposed to be for everyone. And not everyone will enjoy the diversions or the approaches that we take to a day's play. But if enough people do, and if we continue to interest and innovate and never get bored or complacent, I think complacency is a terrible thing in any area of life. And if I feel that I'm being complacent on air, or if I feel that I'm with a group of people who are complacent about the privileges that they enjoy, then I'll slide away, because complacency just sucks the energy out of everything.
Takes the fun away for yourself as well as everybody else, doesn't it?
Absolutely it does. And I've done some crazy things. I remember riding the motorbike at 3:00 in the morning, going past Dulwich College with the mist over the field. It was freezing cold, turning up to commentate on India versus Australia, which kicked off at 4 a.m. British time. And I was freezing cold, shaking, getting off the motorcycle. I'd been sliding about on bits of ice and everything. And I had a warm cup of coffee between my palms, and the music played and everything. And I felt not just the room light up, I felt my whole life light up, because here I was able to watch and talk about the cricket with friends in the room and friends elsewhere in the world. I mean, what a privilege that is.
I get that completely, and I think an awful lot of the people hearing that will as well, because I think that sense of belonging in that family, watching the cricket together or listening to the cricket together, is something that's very hard to compete with. Just a couple of questions before we wrap up, Gary. Your favorite jingles?
Favorite jingles? It's the Ben Stokes jingle. Mog, I think, is the Mog. Although he will keep it under wraps, he does have a history in musical theatre, as you can tell a little by the voice there. But it's such an operatic, soaring, witty, and clever, and perfectly judged jingle. But I'll give a shout out to Prikey in Munich, who was a long-time listener of Test Match Sofa, occasional listener to Guerrilla Cricket, and his Tears for Fears version of "Hello, I am a cricket ball." That one was an absolute belter as well.
Yeah.
Luke Wright through me. That was it. It was Luke Wright. It was Luke Wright through me.
Yeah, there are so many. I mean, it's just unbelievable when you go back through the catalogue. And your favourite cricketers?
My favourite cricketers, there's almost too many to choose from. I had to do something for, which was, I can't remember which magazine it was. It may have been The Spin, or may have been The Cricketer. I can't remember. And I had to do this a few years ago, and I picked my favourite cricketer, Struth. It's Glenn McGrath. And
really?
Glenn McGrath wasn't my favourite person. He still isn't, due to his extracurricular activities, although he's a decent bloke on the mic. But to watch a master technician do one of the hardest things in the game, which is to open the bowling and knock the top off the order over and over again, and to do it with such discipline and such intelligence. Glenn McGrath was an absolute master. That's partly because I was an opening bowler as well, and
you get
I still and I still think he is. He was a genius of kinds. Was Glenn McGrath. There are the spectacular ones, aren't there? There's, I'll take you back a little bit. I saw Ken McEwen make 100 before lunch at Southport playing for Essex. In the 80s, see somebody hitting the ball that hard, that often, was just unheard of. So, Ken McEwen. There was Big Clive at Lancashire, of course, Bully Austin, they're Lancashire heroes of a generation or two. past.
Did you go to
But there's
Old
just
Trafford a
so
lot
many.
to watch the cricket?
I did when I was younger. I don't go so much now because it's a bit further to go,
Yeah.
and so there's always an easier option. Edgbaston's great to watch cricket.
Yeah.
Trent Bridge is lovely to watch cricket. The Oval Lords. So I haven't been to Old Trafford for a few years. I actually haven't been since they turned the square round. But I can tell you that on television, it looks as ugly as it's possible to look Old Trafford. What they've done there to take a grand old ground with a beautiful history and turn it into a venue for Ariana Grande and Katy Perry is something that I know Lancashire members are less than pleased about. But
yes,
I was there to see
the Lancashire Action Group would be with you 100%
yes,
there.
I was there to see both and make 118 in the Ashes in 1981. So it'll always have that, along with Bob Ratcliffe getting 5 wickets in the Gillette Cup. I remember that as well. So I've been very, very fortunate in lots of ways. And I love my outground cricket as well. I wrote a piece at The Guardian a few years ago about the delight of watching cricket at outgrounds.
Yeah.
And I'm the kind of person who sort of leans ahead out of a bus window if they're playing on the village green and the bus stops at the lights, and I'm looking over at Twickenham Green there, saying, "Oh, yeah, should have hit that one through the covers there. No wonder he's got a leading edge to the mid wicket." So
well,
there you go.
Knowing you, Gary, you'll probably write a column for the Guardian about it just because. I just want to say thank you so much, not just for your time today, but for all the joy that you've passed on, because that you used that word joy, and I think it's a really important one in terms of communicating the joy of cricket to our listeners, and you're a huge part of that for so many of us. So I just want to say thank you, and thank you for your time tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Jez. I'm very pleased that you say that. And in some ways, you're a representative of those listeners, because for many years you were a tweeter who has now come onto the other side of the fourth wall, so to borrow a term from theatre. And the joy remains with you as well. So if any of that is coming across, then I've achieved one of the things that I want to achieve. So an absolute pleasure as ever, and all the best, Jez, and all the best to all our Patreons who are listening to this now.
Thanks, Gary.